we mentioned it earlier, the what's going to happen with the playoff and all of that. And one of the things that we discussed a little bit last episode, I wanted to be more specific about, was the ability for the SEC and Big Ten to kind of control the format going forward, not next year, but the year after. And one of the things we have heard, whether it was an official proposal or just rumblings or rumors, but those things get out there for a reason, is expanding the playoff so that the SEC and the Big Ten get 4 automatic bids each, right? And then maybe 2 for the Big Ten. Two things have, or some way that the SEC gets automatic bids because they deserve it, because these are the 2 best leagues. 2 things. One, I don't think there's a big appetite for an expanded playoff out there. We would not see competitiveness out of teams 9 through 12. There's not these other teams. How much better do they deserve a shot? Could they have won it? I don't see that. Well, I also don't know that there's the TV numbers to back up this big windfall of money. 2, undoubtedly, the SEC was the number 1 conference in college football. Undoubtedly. They had the best teams. They had the best players. They had the most draft picks. They won the championships. They blew people out. They were undoubtedly the best. This is not that era of sport. We just spent 25 minutes talking about transfer portal rankings, right? It is a totally new era. And it's not that the SEC won't have great teams again or win the national champ. Texas could, and I know they're kind of new to the league, but, the SEC will be okay. But what kind of weight can they carry in saying we deserve 4 spots in a playoff when you're coming off, you're in a new era? What happened in the old days when your location and your closeness to recruiting talent was such an undeniable advantage is no longer that advantage. And reality says, yeah, you guys will be great. You'll be good, but you're not we're just not buying. I just don't see how going forward you sit there and go, well, look, the first 9 teams in the SEC are so good. No wonder they beat each other up. That was the argument here. And then you look and watch Alabama and South Carolina losing bowl games. And it's bowl games. But I mean, that Michigan team, it wasn't like they were coming in all guns a-blazing. They were missing everybody too. And Tennessee, gets run over by Ohio State, which maybe everyone will. And Texas barely gets by Arizona State, and Georgia gets beat soundly by Notre Dame. How does the SEC, can they make the argument we deserve 4 spots when you're looking and going, why?
There'll certainly be pushback to it, right? I mean, let's go back to the spring. The Big Ten is the one that proposed, and it was, I don't know how you can, if you count an official proposal, but it was certainly proposed in the room, in the meeting, of 3 automatic qualifiers for each, the Big Ten and SEC, 2 for the ACC and Big 12, 1 G5, and then like 3 at large, or depending on how many total teams you have, is however many at larges you have. But so it was a 3-3-2-2-1 model, and now being discussed certainly by those in the Big Ten and SEC, and something discussed certainly at their meeting in Nashville when they had that joint meeting, is a 4-4-2-2-1 model. I would guess that it would be brought up this spring, if not earlier at the January meeting in Nashville or in Atlanta around that national championship game. And I think you're right, Dan. I think there's going to be pushback against it. There was enough pushback against the 3-3-2-2-1 model in the spring for it to stop, for the conversations to stop. And the Big Ten they just stopped talking about the format, right? And they made decisions on, all right, we're going to get the TV deal done, and we're going to have guarantees to any future format, which we discussed before, which is basically the 5 highest ranked conference champions automatically get in, and Notre Dame gets in if it finishes in like the top 12 or top 14. So they made the guarantees, but that's all they did because they couldn't get past the arguments on what the future will look like because there was so much pushback against the multiple AQ deal. But really, and certainly we talked about this a lot, there's going to be pushback, Dan, against changing the seating, immediately. I mean, there'll be pushback against that. So this is going to be it's going to be a really interesting meeting in Atlanta among the commissioners to try to figure out, sift through this stuff, whether they can get unanimity for an immediate change in the seating, which again, I mean, I don't know why, right? The ACC and Big 12 and the Group of Five would vote to change the seating. They're the beneficiaries of it. And then I don't know why they would go along with a multiple AQ, although they might not have a choice there. As we've mentioned a lot, like the Big Ten and SEC have authority for a lot of these future. But how far will the Big Ten and SEC go, right? How much will they push it? And ESPN will have a role obviously in that too.
Pat, is it rumble? Is it in a pile of rubble right now, the SEC's multi-bid argument?
No, it's not in a pile of rubble, but it's not in good shape. They're not playing the hand they thought they would be playing at this point. That's for sure. So they're dealing definitely from a weaker position. To me, I like, first of all, to Ross's point, I can't imagine you could get through significant changes that strongly disadvantage any of the stakeholders when you need unanimity, right? So I think they should be able to, the Big 12, ACC, G5, whoever should be able to say, we're putting the brakes on everything for 2025. 2026, all right. That's the ACC or the SEC and Big Ten's prerogative more there. The thing I think 1 year's playoff evidence is enough to be a disincentive to saying automatic bids by any numbers for anybody. I think you continue to just get the 12 teams with the conference champions, but putting any precise numbers on it, because look what we had. All right, we had SMU and Indiana versus Miami, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina. Was there any significant difference between them? There really wasn't. And so trying to say this conference definitely deserves this many bids every year, some years you're going to get more. The SEC will get more than 3. I am sure some years. But the Big 12 may end up with 3 good teams in a year, and they should get them in, And so we would be using these hair splittings that we basically went through from the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th best teams and trying to make some firm declaration. Well, this league deserves this. I just think that would be silly.
Yeah, I'm in favor of just one, because just earn it. You'll earn it.
Yeah.
Just earn it. But specifically the way the sport is now, it's just the perception, which was reality of 5, 6, 7 years ago, where you're like, hey, look, man, 5th best team in the SEC is better than the 2nd best team in almost any conference. And you could maybe make that case. We had years, it's Alabama, Georgia in the title game. Like, teams are so far better. But it clearly isn't the case. It isn't the case when you look at recruiting rankings. You look at when they do those full talent things, like, blue chip ratios, transfer portal rankings, and you watch the games and you're like, wait, why? Georgia can no longer just maul Notre Dame because they don't have enough linemen or one. And a Notre Dame, which used to have no depth, they'd have like 20 really good players. And then they have a couple other guys. And then, if there was injuries, they couldn't fill it in. And now they lost numerous players this year, and they still got the depth. So the sport's just different. And so to sit there and go, we deserve this many because we're this no longer exists, or that no longer, like, the history doesn't. It's different. And so I don't really care what the case was. And if we were doing this in 2018, I would say, yeah, you got a point. 2020, 2021, but we aren't. So now I just find it to be a really hard argument to say, well, we're the SEC, we deserve this many teams. Maybe, but it isn't. This isn't what it once was. So
yeah, it's not an ironclad advantage. What you're doing is just saying, well, just because we were this before, we deserve this now. And that's
back when talent was done because kids want to play. They used to say, I want to play close to mom and dad. That was the number one bit. And they want, and there's more talent in the Southeast than anywhere else. It's the number one. It's always been that case. It's why in college basketball, there's city teams can be really good, Villanova and stuff like that. Like, because, well, there's a lot of good players in Philadelphia who play basketball, and they want in New York, and they want to play there. UConn. Why is UConn good? Because they're right all there. There's a ton of players around, and they can't. Why aren't they this season notwithstanding? But why are they not great in college football? Because there ain't a ton of players. So that's just now it's playing time and money. And kids are going, I don't care where I go play. I just want to play. And so it's a different sport. So I'm opposed to it. All right.